Okay, welcome back. This is Simon, this is Flight Past, and good to see you all today. We are at the Battle of Waterloo, and we are going to be talking about the positions that Wellington will put his troops prior to the battle. Now, we talked about the left-hand side of his position over here in the hamlets of La Haye and Papelotte. This is going to be slightly less populated for him. He's going to be concentrating here in his center and his right. Now remember, the troops, we're talking kind of parity in numbers. And so you would think that in those terms, maybe the defensive position would be the advantage. But you've got to remember that the French were a higher proportion of veterans. Wellington's army is an amalgamation of English, Scottish, German, Belgium, Dutch, Brunswickers, Nassau's, all these sort of ones. Now, we know that some of these units have performed pretty well. We remember Papontia and Chasseurs Dutch at Quatre Bras. But I don't think Wellington had much confidence in those units. And so his main veteran army is essentially the first two nationalities, which were the British and the Germans elements of his army. Some of his own troops as well, they were not even his main regular veterans from the peninsula. A lot of those troops have been moved over to North America, and so we are talking here more of the second battalions of the regiments. And so there's not as many of his peninsula veterans as you may have thought. Many of the troops he has actually under his command have also been previously under Napoleon's command, so he does get a number of desertions during the course of this campaign. And so what we do find is that a number of the Wellington's troops who are beyond this ridge up here, they're actually going to be troops being fired on for the first time. And in some respects, that can be an advantage if you don't know what's going to happen. And the Duke of Wellington actually says in his memoirs that if he had his Peninsular Army here on the day, then he would have swept Napoleon off the battlefield within a couple of hours. Now, Kincaid, he's one of the 95th Rifles. They were here at this sandpit. He describes the army as a bad army. He said there was foreign auxiliaries who constituted more than half our numerical strength, and with some exceptions, were little better than a new militia, a body without a soul, or like an inflated pillow, and that gives to the touch and resumes its shape again when the pressure ceases. And he mentions as well there's many people who went completely clear of the field, and all they were doing was seen plundering the supply wagons behind. Wellington run, as we talked about in the previous one, he has done an inspection run along his position here, and he's riding, by the way, his horse called Copenhagen. It's a chestnut horse, one that he used a lot in the Peninsular War. It was bred from I think it's called a Rutland Arabian. And basically performs very well under fire, and it has a very good stamina. That's Copenhagen, his horse. And remember, the other thing as well, let's talk about what he was wearing. You know, got a gentleman, but Wellington he never really wears a uniform. He prefers a blue coat. He's got buckskin breeches on and boots. He's got his cocked hat, and sometimes wears these sort of cockades on his lapel. These are these ones. They're like there's one from King George, and then the smaller ones that he got from battles in Portugal and Spain. Now, the relationship between Wellington and his men is, let's put it called respectful, is the word. A cool respect. He's seen, I think, just it's one of those ones where you know where you stand with Wellington. He does inspire confidence in his troops. He is trusted with his dispositions and his defensive positions. He fights with his men. He's always with his men at crisis points. He doesn't get the adulation, of course, that Napoleon gets, but there is a respectful nod to him by the troops. I mean, this is Napoleon is the one who will go out and receive the Vive le Empereurs and all this sort of stuff. The Duke didn't like that at all. He wouldn't allow cheering, because he believed that if you allow cheering at one point, then it allows the reverse to happen if things are not going so well. And of course, Napoleon would be over here. He would be reviewing his troops to the cries of "Vive l'Empereur" and all this sort of stuff, all being very French. The horses, again, is one of those details we don't really think about, but the horses were not the same back in 1815. They tended to be more compact, kind of, they called it an Irish stock. Talking about horses, the Scots Greys, very famous in this part of the Union Brigade. They would be in this area here, on the crossroads. And by the way, so they would have grey horses, but that wasn't the reason why they were called Scots Greys. I think the name comes from the grey cloth that the uniform was made from, and then they were died. And they were reporting that at this time as well, because of the rain, all the dye was washing out. And they had a bearskin hat, and that was a nod to the victory over the French at the during the 7 Years' War. So yeah, the horses were only about 15 hands high. And in general as well, the uniforms of the Allied army, there was a lot of variation. So of course you've got the British, who were predominantly in red, but then you did have elements of the British Army. The 95th Rifles were in this sort of dark green. Now the problems came with the Dutch and the Belgian troops, because they tended to wear blue coats, though they did have a distinctive orange sort of facing on them. The King's German Legion wore green. But what we do find a lot of the time is that when the Dutch and Belgians are posted, especially say over here at Papelotte, their colour of their uniform, they get mistaken for being French and get fired upon. So there's many cases in this campaign where the Belgians and the Dutch get mistaken for French at some point by the Prussians or the British. So predominantly, then, when we talk about the Brunswickers and the 95th Rifles, they're placed in these sort of forward positions. We're talking here at the Sandpit and La Haye-Sainte. They're using rifles. They're here to break up any units that are trying to sort of come around here. It makes this front position very difficult to bypass. If you come this way, you'll get fired upon. And the same on this way if you get too close. So it concentrates the army, and these guys they're going to be trying to fight dirty. They're going to be aiming for officers, sergeants, key personnel in these units, the ones who are basically there to sort of keep cohesion. They're going to be target. They're also going to be trying to stop any of the Grand Battery getting too close. And they will try and take out the artillerymen as well. And they're also here to try to break up the French tirailleurs, who are the equivalent skirmishers. So there will usually be a cloud of skirmishers in front of these French, and these guys here will be trying to take them out as well. Now, in terms of strength, then the left-hand side over here, Wellington will give this area, he will tend to give it to a weaker position, what he believes are weaker troops. So the Belgian and the Dutch forces are concentrated on this area there, but he sprinkles amongst them stronger units that he can trust. One of the examples over here is he gives the Prince, the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, Bernard. Remember him? He was the guy who was down at Quatre Bras, and he's given the responsibility of this section of his flank, and that's quite a a leap of trust for Wellington, giving his whole left flank a sort of the responsibility of someone who only a few years before had been fighting for Napoleon. And then he has his main concentration of his trusted troops here, and he puts four companies of the guard here at Hougoumont, and that shows you immediately where his thoughts are in defense. That putting his best troops in here is essentially saying that he does not want to be turned on his right flank. And you can see through the course of the battle that he, if anything, will send reinforcements to his right, and he's not so concerned about his left. So his major concern is always his right flank, essentially. And he's hoping that the Prussians will come up this ridge to help on this side. Let's jump in a helicopter. We haven't done some flying for a bit. Oh, hello. Orel, hello, good morning. I'm lacking the bigger picture. Prussia fought with Napoleon before, so they would have had intimate knowledge of the tactics. They didn't fight with Napoleon before. There was... I haven't done the previous parts of Napoleonic War. They weren't... The Prussians weren't. If I did mention... Did I mention that? It's more the Belgians had fought with Napoleon before. They were all pretty... by this time, 25 years of fighting, they were all very familiar with their enemies' tactics. There wasn't much innovation by this time in terms of actual field tactics. They all had their sort of ways of fighting, essentially. So they were very aware of what was going on. I don't think Napoleon had faced British line infantry before in any place, and I don't think that sort of reverse slope mentality his marshals and generals definitely had. No, I don't think the Prussians had fought with Napoleon at any point. But some of these minor nations had changed sides. So the Belgians had literally been fighting with the French army a couple of years before, and then they had they'd been amalgamated into the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and they were then part of the Allied army. And a lot of the distrust was that there was some worries that they would go across to the other side. And we saw it on one of the occasions the other way round when the General Beaumont of the French was approaching Charleroi and actually rode across to the Allies. So we have those sort of minor desertions happening all the time. We actually get a lot of desertions within the actual battle itself. We'll come up across examples of some French guys just riding up and saying "Vive le roi" and just basically coming across during the battle. If that's what you mean, I might have missaid something there concerning the Prussians. The other argument, of course, is that these guys have come across, they had been fighting for Napoleon a couple of years ago, and they're part of the Allied army. And I would argue a lot of the cases, they actually fight harder than they would normally do. They're trying to almost prove their now loyalty to their new master. We'll also see, by the way, not want to just say about the Belgians, but there are, well, I think it's the Duke of Cumberland. He just rides off the battlefield with British troops. He just rides them off. He just decides that he doesn't want anything to do with this, and he's forever known as this guy who just walked off the battlefield with his cavalry. So there was weak elements in the British elements as well as everywhere else. But you've got to remember a lot of these. There's a different systems to the army. The British army was a veteran, professional army. They weren't conscripts. So to be in the British red tunic, you would have to take in the King's shilling. Yes, you could be, peer pressured or whatever it is, but you're not a conscript. And the British government at the time wouldn't allow the British militia units to operate outside of the British Isles. So you had to be a professional soldier to be in the British Army, whereas in the Prussians and the Belgian and Dutch army, they had a form of conscription, and they did have militia, and some of them worked very well, but they tended to perform well to begin with. We saw it at Quatre Bras. We saw that they would hold these positions initially, and then they would eventually crumble quite quickly. But one of the things we did notice as well, like with the Prussian army, they're very good at sort of taking a knock. They're very good at being beaten and then reorganizing. So the German sort of ability to reorganize after a setback is one that's really, really impressive. Cool. So yeah, so we've got the guards on the left over there, and something else to remember as well is Wellington didn't have so much trust in his artillery and his cavalry. One thing that you do see in these times is that Wellington has a sort of a more of a trust with his guards, his main red coat brigades and divisions, but when it came to the cavalry and the artillery, he didn't trust them. And with the artillery, I think it's something to do with control. I think it's something to do with like he couldn't control them so much, but he always arguing at the time that the artillery were wasting ammunition, trying to fire back on the French guns. So that was his main concern about them, that they would not, they didn't have any discipline in what they would fire at. And the second thing was the cavalry. He had no trust in the cavalry of the British Army. He just they tended to be in ill discipline. They would very brave, very I don't know what's the word. They would charge at something, but they would be terrible at reorganizing themselves. You will hear over the course of this whole thing with the back at Quatre Bras, we had Pirrou's cavalry. They're doing multiple charges. They're doing multiple pressure points. They're attacking, coming back, and attacking and coming back. But the British cavalry tended to charge, lose all control, and then they will be blown for the rest of the day. And this stems back essentially to a court-martial that occurred to a guy called Colonel George Quentin. He was the commander of the 10th Hussars, and in the previous year he was charged with cowardice in the face of the enemy, because he had refused to charge. And because of that, there's this sort of culture had swept through the British cavalry that they wouldn't want to be seen as cowards, and so they tended to charge at everything. Right, let's take a break here, and we'll come back and we'll have a look then at the French deployment and see where Napoleon put his men.